life because, of course. Well, this week, the conversation that I started on Substack is about why everything is so expensive. And the reason is what a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, because it's so easy to cast blame everywhere except at policies that went into place decades ago that are showing themselves right now. If you are of a certain age or a little older, you might remember President Nixon. You might remember vaguely, or your parents remember, or your grandparents, depending on who's watching this, when they took the dollar off the gold standard. Well, what's that got to do with today? Well, what happened is your dollars prior to that decoupling in August of 1973, hang on, is it 73? I just forgot the year because it's still early in my day here. But I did manage to get up and get my run in because y'all know I'm good like that. Look, I'm going to have to check my own source here. Oh, that would be 1971. I was so close. Okay. So in 1971, if you had a dollar in your hand, you could take it to the bank and get that equivalent of gold because every dollar was backed by gold. That's the gold standard. On August 15th, 1971, Nixon made a temporary decision. I love temporary government programs, to say, hey, we're not going to make this all backed by gold. We're going to untether it so that we can increase the supply of dollars, give more dollars out, do other things with dollars. So now if you take your dollar to the bank, you do not get a dollar's worth of gold because that doesn't exist. And in fact, if you remember, there was that moment when our administration said they were going to go audit Fort Knox and see how much gold was still in there. Do y'all remember that? It was like a fever pitch on social media for about 25 seconds, and then they never went to audit it, so we still don't know what's in Fort Knox. I kind of feel like it's a Geraldo Rivera moment. Y'all remember when he found Al Capone's vault and he was going to go inside? They were going to find all this mob stuff from the era of the mobsters, and there was nothing in it. I think that's one of those defining moments of 1980s TV when we had 3 channels and we all knew what we were talking about. By the way, if you are here watching with me, I forgot to say, please click the like button, share this with a friend, say good morning in the comments, because YouTube only lets people see it if there is activity. So hopefully you can at least click like, even if you don't care what I'm talking about this morning. Anyway, when you took the dollars away from gold, so now you don't have to have gold, that freed up the government to print as many dollars as they want. And I think this has to be talked about when it comes to the cost of housing, because right now, the only conversation is the supply conversation. It has gone on now for several years that the reason there's not enough real estate and it's too high for the young people is just that we don't have enough houses. And that is pretty much a straw man, because you have to address the fact that our dollars are becoming more worthless. And in fact, if you're the history nerd, you remember those photos from 1930s Germany and the Weimar Republic where there were wheelbarrows full of dollars, or I guess they would be Deutschmarks back in the 30s. And you would have to have a huge pile of them to buy a loaf of bread because the dollars themselves were worthless. Well, that's what we're seeing right now in the U.S. economy. You might have the dollars, but everything that you're buying with them is more expensive, because here's how the numbers work. When there are more dollars in the marketplace chasing the same number of goods, you're going to bid more of those dollars to get those same goods. So there's more dollars relative to the goods. Doesn't change the value of the underlying asset. It just changes the price because you have competing dollars for it. Now, I mentioned this because in housing, we have really got to get focused on some intelligent policies if we're going to have housing policies. And that's where we really should have somebody auditing the monetary policy at the Fed. You could look at the books all you want. And of course, they were evaluating the cost of the furniture in the offices. But we need to look at what went wrong here, because I feel confident that the government at some point in the near future, because the economy is shakier and shakier, is going to go hand out checks like they did during the COVID. And when you handed out those checks, now people had more money to go chasing certain items. So that's what I talked about on Substack this week. And now let's dig into the headlines. This is your favorite part, I know. And we'll actually start with Speaking of money, there's another article in the Washington Post talking about how we get out of the housing problem we have, which is the shortage. We've got to build our way out. I want to tell y'all what's not really being said in these articles, which is that there is zero desire to address the affordability crisis. Because if you address the problem with money, that's going to affect more than just housing. The answer that's always promoted, including by the National Association of REALTORS, is to just build more houses. The other half of that sentence is that if you flood the market with houses, you will lower the cost of housing. And if you lower the cost of housing, your Gen Zs and your young millennials can finally buy a house. However, everybody else is going to watch the value of their house diminish. That's going to be a pretty untenable political situation for a whole bunch of elected officials who rely on the reliable voting blocks of their senior citizens, since we know that young people are not really pro-voting at this point, and what they were excited about with Charlie Kirk has been diminished and destroyed as Turning Point has become a shadow of itself due to pretty horrible leadership and policies. So you have young people disengaged from the voting market while they are also the most impacted by the cost of housing. So are our elected officials going to just continue to chase the vote, the people who watch CNN, who watch Fox News, who watch the mainstream media and don't really look at independent media? I'm going to tell y'all, in this article, it was talking about the fact that a lot of us have mentioned the situation with institutional investors. And institutional investors weren't really buying single family homes prior to about, 10 years ago. Actually, no, not 10. It'd be at the end of the recession because, one thing people don't really notice, we're dropping viewers. I must be boring this morning. I'll try and wake it up. Make sure you click like and share this with a friend. I'm going to be very nerdy this morning. Hey, Lori. Hey, Jules. Help me bring some friends in to talk nerd talk. All right. So when we look at the Great Recession, we had in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, there were foreclosures in the market everywhere. Banks had non-performing assets, weren't being paid. They put them back into the marketplace. Regular people could go buy a house. And if you never watched The Big Short, that's probably the best movie about the Great Recession and the housing crisis, even though it's a little bit dramatic. It's a movie. It's supposed to be. And Brad Pitt's in it. He did a very good job. But at that time, there were a lot of foreclosures in the market. What started to happen then that has continued is that the banks would have a big block of foreclosures and they would sell those in a portfolio to an investor in the back hallways. You never had a chance at that as a buyer, and as a realtor, you never had a chance to sell it or to see it. They just sold blocks to investors. Well, that became the most popular strategy. So after the recession ends, all the way until now, a lot of realtors, God love them, and the public have thought that there haven't been foreclosures. Well, there's been foreclosures. You just haven't had access to them. Those houses that were non-performing and people quit paying the note, they have been sold in block to investors. And a lot of the investors who bought them were these hedge funds, these institutional investors. So they've been buying direct from the banks, and then they got into the resale market and they've bought from regular people because they said, hey, we can make money on rents with these houses. And one of the ways they've made a lot of money on rents, when we want to talk about bad policies, is what we would lovingly call house hacking. And if you're a realtor, you know these houses because you go in and every bedroom has its own lock and key. That's because they're renting it by the room, which, was a thing 100 years ago when you had boarders in your house. But this had become an investment strategy. And there's even the little webinar and a Facebook ad people who will talk to you about how to make money house hacking. And we know them in neighborhoods too, because there will be 5 or 6 or 7 cars in the driveway and a host of people coming and going at all hours of the day and night. Well, that was to maximize rents. And if you are a hedge fund investor who's answering to shareholders, you need to maximize those rents. Okay, so let's take that situation. None of us in real estate really like them because neighborhoods that are full of rentals just don't hold up over time. And it's no shade on renters. A lot of people have to rent in time. However, renters don't have a vested interest in taking care of the landscaping or the entrance or the house or anything else. They just live there. So if you have a neighborhood that's primarily rentals, it's going to start feeling a little bit tired. And over time, you'll see crime increase. You will see values start to diminish. Our institutional investors haven't yet hit that point, but they will. And so when we're talking about the amount of houses in the market, I'm actually less concerned about what they own than and I don't want them to own single family homes, to be fair, but I'm less concerned about that than I am about the impact on the markets if they decide to get these assets off the balance sheet. Because if a hedge fund doesn't look at a house as the cute bedroom and look at this nice backyard and we just love this house, institutional investors look at it as a dollar, as a ROI, as cash flow, as revenue. Right now, across the country, our markets are rocky. I don't think there's any other way to put it right now, because there are sellers that are cutting prices at a huge clip. And if you're in real estate, I'm curious what the proportion is that you're seeing on the hot sheet daily. Here in the Charlotte area market, we're Canopy multiple listing service. When I look at the hot sheet every day right now, you're around 1,000 new listings and you're over 2,000 price adjustments. It is outstripping it. And then the under contracts are probably what we have right now, 1,200 under contract right now. So there's under contracts, there's new coming in, and everybody else is cutting. That's a marker of a rocky market, because the house that you list today might sell for full price and it might get an offer in the first week. But those are now few and far between, because more listings are taking 90, 100, 120 days, and the seller is chasing the number, trying to figure out where it is. And I should point out that when you're pricing a house, the realtor is not necessarily overpricing it out of the gate. We're using the data that we have. We're looking at a range. We're helping the seller guess where they fall in the range based on their condition. But the day you put it on the market, the neighbor might come on and say, we got to go, and they undercut you by 50 grand. And so now the comps moved and now the market moved. And so sellers have to adjust, trying to figure out what it's going to take to get a buyer. I think this is really important for people to realize, that the asset class we're talking about is moving right now, right underneath us. And back to what I was saying 30 seconds ago, if our institutional investors are watching the markets get rocky and push down, how long do you think they're going to sit on a giant book of business that's now diminishing in value, because they have shareholders to answer to, and shareholders don't like diminishing value? So in my marketplace, what happens if the institutional investors throw 200 houses on the market today and they undercut everybody by 30 grand? They can actually move the market. And I'm not saying that they will, I'm not saying that they won't. I have no control over their decisions, but one individual home seller, if Joe and Mary decide to sell, that's one house. But if American Homes for Rent wants to cut loose of a bunch of houses, they can actually lever the market. And I haven't heard a lot of conversation about that. So when we're talking institutional investors, if you know your congressman, good, call the office and talk to the person in charge of housing policy. It's probably not your congressman. It's some person on staff. Make sure they're thinking about this, because if the markets get flooded and prices start to fall, that, of course, causes buyers to stop buying, because there is always this mindset of, I've got to wait until prices fall before I buy. And then prices start to go up and they're still waiting on prices to fall. I think I mentioned this last week, that there is this mindset of buy, you know, you're supposed to buy low and sell high, but human nature buys high and sells low because you do what everybody else is doing. It's the same reason some of y'all did this very quickly without asking a whole lot of questions, because you were doing what everybody else does. Just slow your roll for 2 seconds. And we've got to start talking to people making housing policy to talk about this. Hey, Paula. Okay. So back to our next article over here. And don't forget to click like so YouTube will see that y'all are with me this morning. I want to talk to y'all about the huge information around the class action lawsuit that was found against the realtors, that said we weren't explaining things the right way, consumers were paying too much, and they found against the realtors in that courtroom in Missouri, worked out the settlement, which put 9 figures of money into the lawyers' pockets. and hurt every realtor's business, because now you have to get people to understand why we don't necessarily work for free. But I want you to see the difference in headlines, okay? So this went to the appeals court because the people in the class action suit, okay? The people who signed up with the lawyer and said, I want to be a part of the class action, and all the people who responded to those little postcards that said, I want a piece of the action. Because actually, if you're on the class action lawsuit, you're looking for a piece of the action. And we all know what that turns into: money. And I'm sure all of these people have been promised by some guru on the interwebs that they were going to get oodles and scads of money. They were going to get thousands and thousands of dollars. And then after the lawsuit ends and the class action is found against the realtors, and you see over $1 billion in a settlement, and it's negotiated down to $417 million, big dollars. All those people named on that lawsuit were like, oh, jackpot. Ooh, 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 we found it. We got it. Well, what they didn't realize is that their lawyer, Mr. Ketchmark, was going to get his $500 million for all of the time he spent answering emails and showing up in the courtroom. And that those people who put their names on it because they said they got a raw deal buying or selling their houses, they were going to get about nothing. So when all of that shook out, they, of course, appealed it. They don't like that settlement. Well, here's what you saw: one headline. I need y'all to see how the headlines are worded. And this is why. This is why I want you to ask questions, all right, about everything. Just ask, because what you're presented with in one corner of the world will look entirely different presented by another corner of the world. So in this article, we had a senior reporter for the Washington Post who said realtors' huge antitrust deals upheld over home buyer appeals. Okay, use your thinking brain and read that. What does that sound like? What? It sounds like the mean old realtors and their big antitrust deal was held over these poor, innocent little home buyers, doesn't it? That headline is positioned to say that we, the realtors, were supported by the courts. What a crock of crap. That is just straight up bull butter. That's a lie. We are the ones who have been paying the price from member dues for problems that weren't caused by our members, that frankly were caused by a very speculative angle of a lawyer and not defended well by the lawyers that the National Association hired. And we, the practitioners in the field, have paid the price and didn't screw even one home buyer. Not even one. But they act like we did the bad job here. So you flip that around, I want to show you a different headline. So if you look at the headline from Riz Media, which of course is real estate media, that's coming to realtors and to people in and around the real estate space, I would believe that's a more fair headline. The appeals court affirms the settlement, the closing commission lawsuit saga. It's talking about that it was about closing commissions. It was the commission lawsuit, that it's over now, and the appeals court affirmed the settlement. All right, so I want you to notice the difference here. Riz Media correctly says it's an NAR settlement. That's a trade association, the National Association of Realtors. This other one says the realtors' huge antitrust deals, like the rest of us had something to do with it. Come on now. This aggravates me so badly. And we in the public who are realtors, I hate to tell you to get into comment threads, but we should be getting into comment threads saying, hold up, we are members of a trade association who had zero control and zero voice in that whole drama. And we are over here working every hard day trying to help people get into houses in an inflated market that's been inflated by bad monetary policy. And we're still doing the best that we can. So quit talking shade about us. Aggravates my nerves so badly. But I just want y'all to be aware, when you're reading headlines, you aren't necessarily the bad guy. So quit going out into the world thinking you're the bad guy. Hey, Tamara, good morning. Good morning. All right, next headline up. I wanted to share with y'all a conversation that's been going on for several years now. And I want to show you why it doesn't matter who's in power in Washington, D.C. Okay. So this is a case study in why you should always be a little skeptical of your politicians and what comes out of their mouths, okay? And I know most of y'all are more than a little skeptical, but just pay attention to this. So for a long time, in fact, since Bill Clinton was president, and some of y'all that watch me, you're probably so young, you only heard about him, but there's those of us that were around for all of that era and had votes to cast at that time and saw the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal and oh my gracious, and learned about Arkansas, and we learned so many things. And then we had really good legislation come into place that gave a capital gains exemption on primary residence. So you, single Mary, in your house could watch your house go up over time by $250,000, and that will be exempt from cap gains. That is wonderful. And Mary, if you're hitched up to Bob, oh, y'all just been in love and your house went up, you'd have $500,000 of capital gains exclusion. Now, the prices in the 90s, slightly different than they are right now. Slightly different than they were in the 2000s. And in fact, when you get to the 2010s and the recession era and prices go down, it still wasn't a big, huge, crazy deal. As we come out of the recession, it starts to become a bigger deal because we army crawled out in some markets, but some of the markets after the recession ended hockey sticked. Now, if you live in the Bay Area of California, or if you live up in Connecticut or over in New York, for a long time, you've looked at those capital gains and been paying a taxable number because your numbers went up a lot more. Here in North Carolina, we seldom saw somebody outside of the cap gains exemption. But for a few years now, the realtors have been trying to get our lawmakers to hear, because of inflation. This, again, everything goes back to monetary policy. So because of inflation and affordability, everybody's house has gone up. We need to change that number because it never moved, y'all. It hasn't moved since Clinton administration put it into place. It was never indexed for inflation. In fact, if it had been indexed for inflation, it'd be less of an issue, but it just never budged. It's held tight. Why? Because no matter who's in Washington, D.C., they like your tax revenue. And they like your tax revenue so they can spend it on things that have nothing to do with you as an American. They are spending it on their own pet projects. So this article was in the Wall Street Journal, and it's, of course, an opinion article, and it's talking about a policy that Republicans could put in place to save the midterms. Well, they could end the inflation tax. Okay. I do like how the Wall Street Journal is calling it an inflation tax because it really is. You can also call it a COVID era tax because our house prices have done such a jump since the beginning of 2020 with people buying bigger and bigger houses for work at home and doing it on these artificially low interest rates. And then you had the COVID money come into the market. You had people with PPP money. There was money available. People used it chasing houses and drove housing prices up to the point that in normal markets, somebody could be up $250,000. And now they've said, well, I'm not going to sell. I don't want to give that much to the government. I've had this conversation with baby boomers who would like to downsize, and they would go somewhere, but if they're going to sell the house that they paid $40,000 for 50 years ago, and now it's worth $800,000, they're thinking, man, even if I figure out my basis and all the money I've put into it, I'm still going to be paying out a big chunk to tax. I don't want to pay that in taxes. I'll just not use the back bedroom, and I'll do some adjustments and stay put. So your boomers might also be staying put, not just because of the interest rates, and we hear that all the time, the golden handcuffs of the 3% rate, but you do have a lot of baby boomers that haven't moved because they don't want to give their money to the government. So could the Republicans end that and change the capital gains exemption? They could, but they're not going to. The Democrats could have done it. They're not going to. Here's what I want you to realize about administrative policies. The most impacted markets by the capital gains numbers are California and New York, which are run pretty much exclusively by Democrats. They could have changed this at any time in the last 30 years. They haven't done it. So they're not the good guys here asking the Republicans to do it. The Republicans have been in charge multiple times too. they could have changed it because the Republicans are supposed to be a lower tax, smaller government party, but that train left the station a long time ago too. They haven't done it either. And in fact, we've got the Republicans in charge of Washington right now. They're still not going to do it because they're going to use the ones who are opposition Republicans to keep from ever passing it because they don't want to lose their revenue that they play with, because the government doesn't create anything, y'all. It is a consumer, not a producer. So the government wants your money so they can go spend it. And when they don't have enough, they just go print more, which causes more inflation. And that happens because we came off the gold standard. Everything is connected to the reality that our dollars are not that valuable anymore. Now, I will say, I do want this to end. I want the capital gains exemption doubled. I'd like to see $1 million for married couples and 500 for singles. I think that would be a wise thing in the market, because nobody should be taxed on their primary residence. In fact, let's just get rid of it altogether. No capital gains on your primary residence. And how about no property tax increases since you bought it? Let somebody who buys next door pay property taxes based on their purchase price and then leave it alone. Hey, I'm not in charge of anything. That's just what I see as an issue. And speaking of our boomers that would like to probably downsize, but they stay put because they don't want to pay taxes, there's also some information here that our home improvement dollars are not being spent right now, which I found to be interesting, because as I go to people's homes to sell them, I'm still seeing people spending on their houses in North Carolina. I see them adding to their yards. We see the outdoor fireplaces, the beautiful landscaping, a greenhouse. We see more and more chicken coops. We are seeing people that upgrade the appliances for something that's more energy efficient, or to get gas, because everybody likes to have a gas stove. And we've seen these improvements with our older clients. We see grab bars. We see zero entry showers. We'd love to figure out how to do more zero entry entrances to the house. So there is money being spent, but it has really tailed off. Well, you know why it's tailed off? Because everything's more expensive. Why is everything more expensive? Because we came off the gold standard in 1971. Hey! And so the home improvement companies aren't making as much money. The point they make in this article is that what we saw during 2020 to 2022 was a massive spend on home improvement. Why? Because people were work from home. They were Zooming all the time. And being at home, you could do more projects. And then after that, they've tailed off the spending. But I think it's also because gas is high and groceries are high. And you're just not going to spend as much money at Lowe's and Home Depot if your dollars are absolutely being used for what are life necessary items. But this does affect real estate, because we know that having access to home improvement stores helps people buy resale homes, because if you buy something that's not perfect, a nice young couple can come in, do some sweat equity and make it better. But we also know how much they rely on real estate, because the last number that we saw, and I don't even know what the current number is, but for years we were told it was around $65,000 is spent around every resale home purchase in forms of lawn, Home Depot, Wayfair, Amazon, all the things that people do in and around their houses for improvements and repairs and cosmetic changes. Every resale home was definitely a ripple effect in the economy. And right now, sales are off, which means all this stuff is off. They're all interconnected. So I just found that to be interesting. And I'll also point out that this is another reason that if you're going to spend your limited dollars, if you've got one, find a local hardware store. Spend your money with a locally owned business who's not going to be trying to just make shareholders happy. So here I have Harrisburg Hardware. I have Mount Pleasant Hardware. Both of them are fantastic options, and I love them very much. Now, I want to show y'all an article that I think is important as we come into the 2-year anniversary of Hurricane Helene, which of course devastated Western North Carolina. And we're in, of course, hurricane season. So at the coast, y'all are far more used to hurricanes than we were in the mountains. FEMA and NOAA, so the National Oceanic, my brain is on broken today, but anyway, so your two government agencies here are talking about how they are missing all of their money. They had cuts to their budgets. Woe is them during hurricane season, and how it hurts people. But I want to show y'all something, because one thing you might not know about FEMA that people in Western North Carolina were surprised by is that in an area that's never had a flood and is not in a flood map, once it floods, FEMA can come in and say, okay, you're flood zone now, and just draw their little line. FEMA has been known for this for a long time, that they will just redraw lines based on what they want to base it on. My favorite is the 500-year flood map, because we do not have data that goes back 500 years, but yet they add this flood map and then tell everybody how you have to buy insurance. So FEMA has issues. I'm just going to say that. And we also know that the way that they do homeowners is pretty ratchet. And we saw it in Western North Carolina, to tell somebody that the land they had been on for 3 generations, they could not rebuild on, to give declarations about what could and couldn't be built, about what they would and wouldn't help out with. And I have lots of questions about where their dollars go. Regardless, when you see a FEMA flood zone, as a realtor, you disclose that to your clients and you let them know, this is flood zone, this is floodway. I had the question just last week from buyers. They said, is it going to flood here? And I said, if it rains where you are, it can flood. Your evidence is Western North Carolina. And every realtor should be telling people that, because a house that's not in the flood zone can still get flood insurance. And it's actually not super expensive because it's not in the floodway. Now, we know after Hurricane Harvey in Texas, about 80% of the impacted houses didn't have flood insurance at all, because it was another area that had no history of flooding. So your FEMA maps are a guess at best and a revenue producer at a realistic guess of the situation. Okay, here's my favorite part from that article. Okay, FEMA was fussing because they don't have enough money to have new maps, and they want to use NOAA to make their maps. In the article, it says, FEMA maps rely on NOAA climate and weather data to stay current. And with that data collection scaled back, maps are becoming less reliable. Right? Read this. As a result, firms are increasingly turning to local weather records, historical storm patterns, and private risk models to fill the gap. Oh, so you're saying that your flood information relies on local weather patterns. Oh, and historical stuff in that place. Well, you know what? Sign me up, because that sounds like a far better way to assess risk than some cubicle person from Washington, D.C. roaming into the western part of North Carolina in the mountains to draw a line and tell somebody where you can and can't live. We all know there's risk to life. There's risk to living. You're not guaranteed safety in your house, or if I walk out this door, I could fall and bust my face or get stung by a hornet, which I did. It's not as red today. It's just a part of life. It's part of housing. Now, people should have informed consent. They should know. If you're looking at local historical weather and patterns, I think everybody in Western North Carolina, when we help people buy and sell, it's how was this impacted by Hurricane Helene? Then we can tell them where the water was and what happened with the tree fall area, and was there a landslide? Was there any elevation place? Think about this, right? That is a huge opportunity to say, here's what we know. We also know that that area of the French Broad River that was 28 feet above flood stage, that hadn't happened since the days of Noah, frankly. And when you look at those trees, and that water line was way up yonder in the trees, you would be able to, and hopefully, use your very good reasoning and say, okay, it happened one time, it could happen again. But when, we don't know. What's my risk? Well, I know that the history shows that if you have been struck by lightning one time, like my friend Zoltan was struck by lightning, then you should say a prayer for him, because he's better now. But we know that if you've been struck by lightning one time, you're very likely to be struck by lightning again. And in that scenario, okay, somebody might say, well, if this area flooded the one time, I don't want to take the chance. That's their choice. I don't like what FEMA did in Western North Carolina to tell somebody, no, you can't rebuild here. Don't care if your mama and your grandma lived on this property. You're not living here again because we say so. I'm glad FEMA lost that money. I'm glad NOAA got scaled back, because I believe local people know things better. I believe local realtors know local real estate better. And in fact, when you look at all the AI and the policymakers that are out there, they need to talk to realtors, because we see things, we know things, and we are generally pretty rational people. Some, go off the edge a little bit. I might get a little bit wound up from time to time, but what we do for people is wildly important. So That being said, I think I'm out of topics for today. And Mark and Mel, I'm glad you're here today. I will say I've got a video coming out about the data collector situation in the appraisal world. And I'll just remind y'all, if you have not subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe. Please hit like, leave me a little comment so we can make the algorithm happy. But when my data collector video comes out, I want y'all to remember that at least in North Carolina, and your state might be different, there's no way for the public to get recourse if they have a shifty data collector in their house because they're unlicensed and they're sent in. And so as a realtor, I have a responsibility to my buyers to make sure they know they deserve a certified residential appraiser and not some random data collector. And to home sellers, that they know that that data collector has no license, no liability insurance, is not bonded, and wants to come into the home where they lay their heads down to sleep at night, but they're sending these people in for $50 to run a number on your house. Y'all, it's a mess out there. So thank you for logging in. It's so good to see y'all today. Tell a friend about real estate in a way that's positive, because frankly, in our markets right now, oh, and I should probably mention, there is the big talk of the big interest rate increase coming in September. You should also know that markets start baking that in advance of that rate decision. So don't expect a big jump in September. Expect rates to continue to move, because the markets will pre-react to that news, which means if you want to buy a house, it would be wise to talk to a lender right now, and it will be wise to ask them about a lock on that interest rate so you have a chance to shop. Even if rates are moving up, your rate will be nailed down. That's something a smart realtor will tell you, and so will a local lender. And by the way, if you're trying to get your loan from some random website, they're probably not going to tell you those things. So shop local, be local. And oh, hey, Terry, thank you for what you do. And yeah, if y'all didn't see that hour and a half I did with Peter Gallo about appraisal stuff and the big changes that are coming in November, you should go back and watch it, because Peter is probably one of the smartest people I've had the pleasure to talk to. And I love it when his passion for his profession is at a really high level. So go learn from Peter. Take care of other people.